Right, and let's build on that story. Barely a week ago, South African officials announced they'd agreed to an $8.5 billion package of grants and concessional finance to pay for part of the cost of retiring some of the country's coal power plants, which you've just seen in Lindy's piece there. But given what we've seen so far, does that deal, does that amount of money go far enough? I explore that with Gyude Moore. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. Before that, he was Liberia's Minister for Public Works between 2014 and 2018.
Despite the small number that we saw in South Africa, it still provides a precedent that other countries can come to the global partners with and say, we want a deal similar to South Africa. It may not be the same numbers, but I think it's a really, really good start.
All right, let me wrap this up by putting a scenario to you. Let's assume that COP26 is basically a replay of Paris in 2015 and the funding doesn't come through. So African governments basically are operating on their own. What are the top three things that they need to focus on in terms of adaptation and mitigation as far as climate change is concerned?
The World Meteorological Organization released a report that showed that there are two threats that are going to be very, very prevalent on the continent. The first is going to be drought. We're going to see significant drought across the continent, I mean from east to west to south, and even in the north. So more than 60% of the population of the continent is dependent on some form of agriculture. That agriculture is usually not irrigated, it's rain-fed. And so any disruption to the climate has significant impact on livelihoods. That drought is going to lead to famines. We're seeing a climate-induced famine currently in Madagascar. And so the first thing is to be able to do adaptation. First, research on crops that are drought resistant. You definitely need that, especially for the staples that we eat.
And they have, the governments have to own that intellectual property as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. If they need to find a way to cut spending in other areas so that they can be able to direct spending in that. But so that this is very important because again, if someone else has the intellectual property, it puts us at a disadvantage. The second thing that the report notes is there's going to be, because of the failure of the rains and because of the droughts, then when the rains do come, the rains are going to be so ferocious, they're going to lead to flooding. So that's the next thing. We need to build infrastructure that can withstand flooding, right? So now it's not just, in the past when we did infrastructure, I was Minister of Infrastructure, the primary criteria was cost. Now we have to go beyond cost. We need to build infrastructure that can withstand flooding. And so it means that the infrastructure we built may not always be the cheapest, but it has to be the one that can last the longest. We see that, we're looking at FOCAC to see what China decides. Well, there has been a decline, a noticeable decline in Chinese lending, right? And what we are perceiving as sort of China is no longer as open to African risk, that the appetite has been abated. What does that mean going forward? Because China is such an important part of our infrastructure financing. So after FOCAC, we will see. But I think for African governments looking to build climate resilient infrastructure, China is going to be an important part of that. Now we see that B3W they're thinking about doing projects, supposedly 10 projects in the new year. We'll see what those projects are. The global connectivity from the EU. I think African governments, it is really, really important for them to be able to establish or at least pursue a diversity in sources of financing. But agriculture, infrastructure are going to be the two core places in responding to the climate crisis.